Hey students, welcome to another Mr. Ness screencast. Today's aim is Progressive Era Amendments. And here are your objectives. Please pause the video, look these questions over, and get ready to take some notes. Let's start by looking at all the presidents that served during the Progressive Era. The most well-known is the first one, Theodore Roosevelt. But the two presidents that came after Roosevelt were also progressives, especially when it came to trust busting. Roosevelt's successor was this man, William Howard Taft, who pursued so many antitrust cases against monopolies that he was known as the Great Trust Buster. After Taft came Woodrow Wilson, who's best known for his role during World War I, which you will learn about next week. Wilson was also president when the 19th Amendment was ratified. That's the Women's Suffrage Amendment, and he was the first president to endorse women's suffrage. Now let's look at some of the Progressive Era amendments. So passing an amendment is an extremely difficult process, and that's a big reason why only 17 amendments have been passed in the more than 200 years since the ratification of the Constitution. And yet, during the Progressive Era, 4 amendments were passed in a period of just 6 years. And I think that goes to show how much people were seeking change during this time. As I tell you about each amendment, pay attention to how it changed the Constitution, what problem or problems it might have been responding to, and how it might have solved that problem. The first Progressive Era amendment was the 16th Amendment, passed in 1913. This amendment established a federal graduated tax on people's income, or a graduated income tax. An income tax means that the government takes money from people's paychecks to pay for its budget. And a graduated income tax means that wealthier people pay a higher tax rate than poorer people do. The graduated income tax was first proposed by the Populist Party, who believed that the wealthy robber barons were making money unfairly and creating a widening gap between rich and poor. The Populists wanted the robber barons to be taxed at a high rate, so that their money could support government spending that all citizens could benefit from, rich and poor. So the idea was that this tax would help redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor, thereby closing the gap between the two classes. Okay, that is the 16th Amendment with a graduated income tax. The next amendment is the 17th Amendment, also passed in 1913, and also an idea of the populists, who were angered by corruption and the influence of money in politics. Before the 17th Amendment, senators in Congress were elected by state representatives, in other words, by other politicians. The populists believed that if ordinary citizens, not politicians who might be corrupt, if ordinary citizens could elect their senators themselves, they wouldn't choose corrupt candidates. So we call this idea the direct election of senators. And ever since this amendment was ratified in 1913, citizens get to vote directly for Senate candidates. So that is the 17th Amendment, direct election of senators. The next amendment is the 18th Amendment, passed in 1919. The 18th Amendment outlawed the production and sale of alcohol throughout the U.S., and it started a period called Prohibition. You will learn more about Prohibition later this semester. Prohibition was a victory for a movement called the Temperance Movement, which had sought to ban alcohol throughout the 1800s. The leaders of the temperance movement were mostly women, And among other things, they were trying to prevent the problem of alcoholic men abusing their wives and neglecting their children. And this amendment hoped to solve that problem by making alcohol illegal. And the last amendment is the 19th Amendment, which granted women's suffrage. You learned about this earlier. The 19th Amendment was the result of the long struggle by the women's rights movement to gain the right to vote for women. But remember, as you learned in an earlier screencast, this amendment really only caused a change for white women, because black women, who mostly lived in the South, were still disenfranchised. Here's a recap of the 4 Progressive Era amendments I just mentioned. Pause the video for a moment and review what you've learned. Now it's time to review the objectives. If you don't know the answer to any of them, just rewind the video and look again. And I will see you in class. Bye, students.